change begins at the top. So if an organization that's been around for a long time wants to make big changes, that'll only happen if one of two things happens. Number one is there's significant change at the senior leadership level, or the senior leaders undergo kind of for lack of a better word, a spiritual revelation, right? They wake up and have that moment that is going to be life-changing for them.
Hey everyone, it's John Adams. Welcome back to the Process Lab podcast, the show where we tackle common business process problems and provide insight for operational excellence. Today on the show, we will be discussing innovation and how to inculcate it at your company. And we are very fortunate to be joined by an expert, Nick Jain, CEO of IdeaScale. Nick, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, John. Really excited to be here today.
Excellent. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, your company, and then we'll kick it off by getting some questions going.
Perfect. So as you said, I'm the CEO of IdeaScale. We are the largest innovation software company on the planet. We've been around about 15 years. We're in 8 countries now, several hundred customers. Customers are major organizations, Comcast, US Post Office, hospital systems, you name it. Like, these are big media organizations. And the problem we help them solve is, look, when you become big, you kind of become bureaucratic and you become less innovative than those startups that are out there to eat your lunch or to disrupt you. And our software helps large organizations become and stay more innovative than they would, in the absence of proper processes and technology.
So do you usually come in after the fact, after like some hardening of the arteries has taken place, or?
Yeah. So look, usually people don't call us after a disaster because they're busy dealing with a disaster. But most organizations at some point in their level, at some stage of their maturity, most organizations realize that, hey, we are not as innovative, as hungry, as creative as we were when we were small, lean, and agile. And so when they make that kind of mindset shift, they often do a few things. Number one, they they hire people whose jobs it is to innovate. So a lot of companies are in the Fortune 500, for example, Chief Innovation Officer was not a title 20 years ago. Now more and more, I think it's about a third of the Fortune 500 have somebody, who sits at the boardroom and their title is Chief Innovation Officer. Number two is they actually change some of the processes that have made them, cause the hardening of the arteries, because they realize some of the things that make them very bureaucratic are the exact opposite of what allows them to be innovative. And number three, they start adding tools and technology that lets them be more effective in the same way. And we play in that third area.
What would you say kills innovation? I mean, I think you started on that path.
It's two things really that happen. Number one is when you get big, you're successful, the hunger goes away. When you're small, you kind of have to be creative and innovative and doing new things. Otherwise, you're out of business. That hunger goes away when you're a $1 billion corporation or an government agency that's been around for 100 years. You're going to be around tomorrow. That fear, motivation, whatever goes away, or significantly goes away. The second is that when you get big, your entire organization, your processes are set up to do whatever you're doing really, really well. When you build a big factory, that factory is optimized for churning out that same shoe or that same car every single day. By definition, innovation means doing something new. So any process that is designed to do something old really efficiently innately inhibits you from doing something new.
And so what's the elixir? Like what's the secret sauce of IdeaScale for a company?
Sure. So again, I want to be clear. IdeaScale by itself does not solve all your innovation problems as much as I would love it to, right? That would be false advertising. To do innovation right, you need 3 things. Number one, you need people who are innately wanting to be creative or try new things. Not all people are like that. That's okay. We need all types to kind of make the world go round. Number 2, you need the right incentives and processes. So by incentives, I mean a lot of large organizations, when you try something new, if you fail, they fire, demote, or laugh at you. And when you succeed, they steal your idea and make $1 billion off it. So if you're a typical creative, innovative person at a large organization, your incentive is don't innovate here. Go start your own company. Go somewhere else, right? Because when you screw up, they're going to slap you. And when you do well, they're going to steal your idea. So you have to kind of flip that that incentive structure to give people the room to experiment, but also the rewards of experimenting. And And then number three, you need the right tools and technology to innovate. And an example, the analogy I'd like to draw is, imagine you are a world-class athlete, you're motivated, you want to go to the Olympics, but no one gives you a pair of shoes. It's really hard to go run without that very simple, tool, shoes, or access to weights, or whatever your sport is. So a lot of organizations actually, they've got number one right. They've hired creative people. They have, create all these great incentives, and then they put them in a dark room by themselves and say, go be creative. Which is kind of a silly thing. You want to give people the tools that allow them to be to excel in their professions or what they're required to do. And again, that's where we excel.
Is the suggestion then that if an entity does have their operations really down tight, that innovation is something that you try injecting throughout the organization?
Sure. So
when you say the incentives, like, is that for everybody?
Sure. Incentives should be a fundamental organization-wide change. If you have a culture where you only have like 3 people who are incentivized to do something creative, guess what? Those 3 people are the only ones who are going to do something innovative. And that's great. But 3 people, no matter how intelligent, no matter how hardworking they are not going to make impacts that are, going to impact 100,000 person organization. No matter how great Steve Jobs is, he himself was not single-handedly doing everything that Apple did. There was, teams and teams of people that enabled Apple's creativity and success. So number one, the incentive portion, you definitely have to do organization-wide. The people portion, you need people. You don't need to change and make everyone in an organization innovative, but you need a critical mass. And that number is somewhere, research shows, between 5 to 15% of an organization need to be creative or innovative or want to try new things. Otherwise, they get washed out by the other organizational processes.
I think that's where I was going, is the concern being that if everyone is just assigned the job of being innovative, does that could that lead to, let's say, more noise in the system as opposed to a blanket culture of innovation?
Sure. So there's actually 2 competing theories on this. There's not a clear answer. Number one is encourage everyone to be innovative, because noise or chaos is actually where innovation creativity comes out of. That if everyone is trying something, most of it, the ideas they will come up with are total crap. But guess what? Hidden amongst that ocean of garbage is actually some good ideas. That's actually one of the things our software does really good at. It helps you collect all the ideas and sort out the good stuff from the bad stuff. The second theory is, don't force or push everyone to be innovative, but allow anybody the space to be innovative if they want. And a good example of this is from the 1980s and 1990s. A lot of Japanese auto manufacturing companies, they basically, or not just auto, but industrial companies, we should say, but specifically the auto industry, encouraged line workers to point out, hey, this can be fixed or this can be improved. And that's somebody who doesn't necessarily have a college degree, is sitting there working a blue-collar job in a very hierarchical system. And yet even they were able to accomplish this culture where the person who has an idea, they can kind of metaphorically pull the cord, raise their hand and say to their boss, hey, here's a way to improve our line efficiency.
And so I guess then operationally, how does IdeaScale help separate the signal from the noise?
Sure. You can think of it, our software is basically a social network for ideas. So instead, in TikTok, for example, or Instagram, you post a funny picture of your cat, people upvote it and downvote it, and some algorithms rank up. And suddenly you have this funny dance video from a kid in Vietnam that you would have never met, but that's the video that just tweaks all the right neurons in your brain, makes you and millions of other people happy. Our software does that, except for ideas. So people post their ideas. Other people simply upvote and downvote the ideas. There's some algorithms, math that goes into it, and the best ideas rise to the top. And that can be both on a voting system, some algorithmic system, some criteria that is specific to your organization, but the best ideas rise to the top. So a very tangible example is we use our own software. We eat our own cooking. That's how we do a product development for our software. It could be our employees, our customers, our prospects. You could come suggest an idea for how we make our software better. All goes into the system. It's all public. Anybody can vote on it. And the best ideas rise to the top, and the best ideas are immediately taken by our product team, turned into actual designs and specifications that are shipped off to engineering. And that cycle time means that somebody can submit an idea sitting in Bangladesh today, or France, or Rwanda, and that can, if it's a good idea, it very quickly rises to the top of the system. And 2 weeks later, it can be a feature out the door.
And without getting too technical, I guess, but how does it merge with other ticketing systems? So people are putting in tickets for systems and other things that sometimes can be innovative in what.
Sure. So it's the ticketing system is what would come after IdeaScale. We have a light ticketing system built into the end, but this is the pre-ticketing system before you create like a proper specific. Sorry, this helps you sort or collect all of the ideas. Number one. Number two, sort the good ideas from the bad ideas. And number three, if you want, you can kind of use it as a ticketing or project management system. But we usually our software integrates with more formal ticketing systems like UTrack. So for example, for our own ticketing system, we use like a mix of GitHub and UTrack. So once we've decided what are the good ideas that are worth doing, we move them into a proper ticketing system.
Got it. And how do you see AI or known innovation that's coming or here? How does that fit in?
Sure, I think AI is impacting our industry, innovation software more broadly in three ways. Number one, it is giving more access to people to contribute their ideas. So a good example is, let's imagine your company's based in the United States. Their primary language of communication is English, and you're sitting in Japan. Today, several years ago, it would be very hard for you to communicate your idea to an American CEO or American team if you're not confident in English, because you'll feel like you're stupid. They're going to laugh at your accent or the way you write. Today, AI makes that seamless. It's create a lot more accessibility, getting rid of that stage fright element. Number two.
Sorry, can you expand on that? How
sure.
Does it do that?
So people, there's that classic notion. We talk about stage fright, that, hey, somebody's afraid to get in front of a group of people and speak. But turns out that also occurs in the written word. So there are people who may be perfectly fluent in the language, but they are afraid to write something because it won't use, let's say, high English, or it won't use those polysyllabic words that make them sound fancy. And so they just don't write it because they are afraid of sounding stupid. And so AI basically changes that, because now it will make you sound intelligent. You can take the idea in your head, you can write out, in your garbled English or your, simple English, and it can make it sound fancy and presentable and formal in a way that makes you look good. And that takes away that human kind of fear element that has prevented a lot of people from participating as well as they could in the idea economy.
Cool. Let's, if we can, just go on this a little bit longer.
Yeah.
How does IdeaScale help with bringing in more voices into the mix?
Sure. So again, like a social network, our software, I'll use the example of how we use our own software. Anyone in the world, literally anyone, they could be an employee of IdeaScale, they could be customer, they could be somebody totally unaffiliated with IdeaScale in any way. They can go to ideas.ideascale.com right now and participate. Cost them nothing. They can submit their idea. They can vote on other people's ideas. And what that means is someone sitting in Japan can submit in Japanese, or they can write something in English, and the AI can make their English sound better if they're not perfectly fluent. And that can be now accessible to someone sitting in the United States in English, or somebody sitting in Russia who can read it natively in Russian, right? So, and I'm just talking about language barriers in terms of, Russian versus Japanese versus English, but there's also the formality of barriers, right? Like somebody sitting in New York finance uses a different language than somebody sitting in the milk industry in the Madison, Wisconsin area. And yet that person, even though they're both speaking American English, the idioms will be different. And so you want to make sure that if you're you're sitting in a different state, you're still communicating in a way that will that you won't be biased against because of your choice of words, your structure of language. And that, again, socioeconomic class comes into that too, right? Like the words I would use, I grew up in Canada. I spell color with a U. Or actually now I spell it without the U. But I remember when I moved to the United States, every time I wrote color with a U, in college, people would laugh at me. The professors would mark me down. And that's something that's like in a college situation. Imagine the barriers that like ideas and communication has to cross when you're not in the theoretically open community of a college.
And I was expanding also, I mean, the language barrier is huge, but I found when working with teams for process improvement purposes, that a lot of times it was the person who wasn't speaking. If I encouraged them to say something that had the best idea, they say, this probably is stupid, but, and then boom, they would say something, be like, that was like right on the money. How does IdeaScale help with that aspect of it?
Sure. I think it solves, or not, solve is too strong word. It addresses that your point in three ways. Number one is sometimes those introverted people just need more space. You provided that space by actively asking your colleague, hey, what do you think? Other times they have space if they can just do it asynchronously, which means they don't have to speak up in that live high pressure meeting, but they can rather write it on their time. And that's, again, something you can do with any software system, because software systems like ours are asynchronous. You can submit your idea later when you're calm, when you're in your zone. Number two is another kind of parallel issue to what you spoke about is the diversity of the people contributing ideas changes significantly when you create an asynchronous kind of private system for communication. Because we're often told that, not told, we know that like people who look a certain way or speak a certain way may not contribute as fully to society, because there's not a safe space for them to do so. Systems like IdeaScale, and again, I'm talking about IdeaScale, but there's a lot of the benefits of technology more generally. It creates more open spaces for them to do so. And the third is anonymity, right? If our system, you can just submit ideas anonymously. I submit ideas sometimes under my own name, but sometimes I want to be careful. Like, hey, I don't want people biased in favor of this or voting for or against it because it comes from the CEO. So sometimes I'll submit ideas anonymously. And some organizations actually, they want to be 100% anonymous because they want to totally separate the idea from the merit of the idea from the merit of the individual, or the rank of the individual.
And I guess the very fact that a company is invested in IdeaScale sends a message to the employees that their participation is welcome.
Exactly. We strongly encourage our organization, our customers, to be as open as possible. Right now, obviously, they can't put sensitive intellectual property on a fully open system. So when they're using our system for like sensitive IP, they may restrict it to employees. But I really encourage my customers to have some versions of the community where as many people can participate as possible, whether that be their customers, their employees, the folks sitting in a back office somewhere. The more people participate, the better ideas you get. The more ideas you get, the better ideas you get, and you also just increase employee engagement within your system. Not just employee, I should say stakeholder engagement.
And where does strategy that might be being set from up high fit with ideas or innovation?
Sure. So organization, I would suggest innovation has to take at least two vectors. Number one is all organizations should be open-minded towards any sort of innovation, just an open-ended kind of like, let's get all the great ideas and we'll figure out when they're valuable. Like, we may have a great idea that's just not valuable, or we don't have enough money to do it or not enough time, but have a venue or a forum where all great ideas, regardless of what type they are, whether they're cost cutting, whether they're new products, whether they're snacks in the kitchen, get them all together. The number two is the one that aligns with a specific short-term or medium-term strategy of the organization. So an organization may say, hey, our strategy is to develop new drugs. So we want to be using IdeaScale software to collect new drug ideas and develop new drug ideas. But even if that is their strategy, I say, yes, go ahead and do that. But also have an open-minded kind of what we call a parallel campaign running, where anybody can be suggesting stuff that is not related to drugs, because guess what? Some of those ideas are going to be really cool.
And are there any other strategies, it could even be beyond IdeaScale, to help a company push through, get out of its own way when it comes to innovation, by being afraid of that change, especially from up high?
I think less from the technology point of view, but there's the two other things I recommend kind of anybody who wants to be serious about innovation is think about your incentive structure and your HR structure, because what you are rewarding people for, that's number one. Actually, go think really hard about that incentive structure and go formally change it. Like, the executives, the CFO and CEO should sit down with the head of HR and go rejigger their incentive systems, because most of corporate America has really negative incentives for innovation. Hollywood's a classic one, right? Guess how you get to become $1 billion director? You just never have a flop. So it discourages you from ever doing anything creative until your name already ends in Spielberg, right? So that's what. So you actually like Hollywood discourages people from doing this, from being innovative until very, very late in their careers. So that's number one. You can change the incentive systems, and we encourage folks to do so. Number two is to, how would I call it? It is, why am I blanking for a second? I'm having a brain freeze.
Well, I'm jumping everywhere.
Yeah,
I'm jumping all over the place on you. So
we can come back to that. There's the second important thing I always recommend customers do, and I'm blanking on it for a moment, but go on.
to implement innovation.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know what the question is. I'm just blanking on what the second big step that I always recommend folks do is.
And if they are narrowing their focus, let's say they say we need to get more AI in our company or something like that. So we only want to hear ideas about AI. Do you find that that still can lead to broader innovation, or on its own, that focus is more of the same?
So if someone has a targeted goal, like on, let's say, having more I think that's a meritorious goal in and of itself, right? And you will actually, whether you're using, IdeaScale or or pen and paper, you will come up with new ways to use AI that are worth doing if that is your narrow focus. The disadvantage of having a narrow focus is you obviously miss everything that is outside your field, your aperture or field of view. So again, the recommendation is yes, you will actually get, if you want to become better at one thing in life, you will become better at one thing in life. If you go to the gym and all you work on is squats, right? All you do is work on squats. Guess what? After a few months or a few years, your quads will be huge and you'll be able, right? But guess what? You will have missed all the other opportunities to do things while you were at the gym. You wouldn't have worked on your chest. You wouldn't have gone for a run. You wouldn't have, stretched and loosened those muscles. So even though you were already going to the gym, you missed the opportunity to do all those things while you were already there for that half hour. And so that's why I kind of encourage folks to, if they are having a narrow strategic focus or goal, to not do so at the expense of the other things that they can do in parallel, because it's very rarely in life or in business that it's an either or choice. It's often we can do this, and that doesn't prohibit us from doing other things simultaneously.
Yeah, and I find that it's that they need to give the reason why. So if they say AI for AI's sake, it's like saying, we need weights for weight's sake, as opposed to like, what's the result, that they want. And that leads me to transformation. So if a company knows that they need, some major transformation, standardization, and automation, how does, I'll start before even, the idea scale. What's your recommendation for company, especially in a company that's been around a long time, maybe pretty set in its ways, to go about a transformation?
Sure. Change begins at the top. So if an organization that's been around for a long time wants to make big changes, that'll only happen if one of two things happens. Number one is there's significant change at the senior leadership level, or the senior leaders undergo kind of for lack of a better word, a spiritual revelation, right? They wake up and have that moment that is going to be life-changing for them. That latter, by the way, happens pretty rarely, right? Very rarely does somebody who's already leading an organization have a fundamentally life-changing or eye-opening experience that changes their perspective in life or changes their managerial style. So
maybe a fundamental desire for something, for a result, but not to change how they're doing business.
It's really hard to change habits. Like, by the time you're, let's say, CEO of $1 billion company, you've been doing the same thing for 30, 40, 50 years, and you've developed habits, no matter how well-intentioned you are. And most of these executives are well-intentioned, hardworking, ethical folks, but it is very hard. If you just look at the research on psychology, it's really hard for people to change habits that they've been doing for 30, 40, 50 years. Not impossible, but very difficult. And, a fraction of a percent of people ever accomplish breaking, long-standing habits. So if you look at the organizational research, I think, what is it? The MIT Sloan Business, the Sloan School of Business at MIT, I think it put out a great study on this 10 or 15 years ago, that the organizations that actually underwent significant change, about 80% of them, they underwent that change explicitly because of or succeeded by changes in the senior leadership level, either instigated at a board level or one level below the board, the executive team.
Do you recommend having a chief innovation officer or similar role?
So yes, I think any mid or large scale organization should have somebody whose sole job it is to come up with new ways of doing things. It is too easy for almost anybody, whether you're chief marketing officer, chief financial officer, chief executive officer, to be so caught up and busy in maintaining the status quo and keeping the status quo efficiently that they don't have the mental bandwidth to go look and discover new things. So for large organizations or for mid organizations and above, and I'd say roughly about 1,000 people and above, you should really start having somebody who's called, chief innovation officer, chief of R&D, somebody whose sole job it is to come up with like new stuff.
And do you recommend when it comes time for implementation, pilots or whole scale, or is that dependent on leadership sponsorship?
So when you're trying out a new tool like IdeaScale, obviously go for a pilot, right? That's the right thing. You obviously want to try something when you're trying a new tool because you may want to try other tools. You may want to try Slack. You may want to try Teams. You may want to try Microsoft Excel, not as alternatives to us, but I'm saying you might want to try Excel versus Google Sheets. Go pilot one or two, right? For any piece of software, you should run a pilot. But for the actual notion of making innovation a core business value, that is not something you can either dip your toes in or not. You either want to innovate as an organization that requires a whole cloth change in how your organization perceives its strategy over the next decade or 2 decades, or you're kind of screwing around, right? You can't it's not like, hey, I'm going to try pilot getting in shape. You either decide to get in shape or you don't. I apologize for the gym analogies, but that's like often this is a new muscle that organizations are developing, and you can't half-ass it. You either do or don't. And that's true with a lot of things in business. You can't pilot a strategic change. You're making a strategy, you're making a values-based decision, or you're not.
Yeah. So innovation can't just be a checkbox, like we have someone in that role, we're done.
I mean, you can pay somebody $500,000 a year to be your chief innovation officer. That's an expense item for your organization. I'm sure that it creates a job for somebody, but does it solve your business problem? Like, let's be clear, organizations are not creating chief innovation officers because they like paying somebody a bunch of money to have that title. They're doing it because they are facing a real problem. Like organizations, not just in America, but globally, are being disrupted at an unprecedented rate. Like 3 weeks ago, Intel got kicked off the S&P 500. They were the definition of semiconductor innovation for the last 60 years. And over the last decade or two, they got upended by TSMC and NVIDIA. And guess what? Intel spends more on R&D than those two organizations combined. So it wasn't money. They were spending more money. They had more people doing R&D. But for some reason, Intel lost this innovation culture that had, made them such a hallmark of, of semiconductor technology for, 3 generations of people.
Do you find that IdeaScale helps companies avoid a fate like that? Or is it more the culture that needs to change?
It's all three, right? Like, again, I really believe our software, it's good, but I also want to be honest and say our software by itself is not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. If you want to be innovative, you need the right people, you need the right process and technology. You need the right processes and incentives, and you need the right technology. If you're missing any of that 3-legged stool, your stool falls over. Again, I would love to say we solve it all. That would be a bald-faced lie.
But how does it help?
Sure. So how do we help, you mean?
How do you help get that innovation and tie it to avoiding a fate of, I'll name Blockbuster, so it's an old example.
I remember Blockbuster. So I think our software does 3 things extraordinarily well. Number one, it's scalable, which most software is, by the way, right? So number one, you can, whether you're 1,000 people or 100,000, software just scales. It's very easy for for the line worker in Japan or the milk worker in Wisconsin or the CEO in London. They can all participate equally and scalably. That's number one. Number 2 is increase the diversity of the ideas you get. Most organizations, ideas are really percolating from somebody, I think the ratio is within 100 physical feet of the CEO, right? And the research shows for every 100 feet you're further away from the CEO, the probability goes down by 50%. So by the time you're 300 feet away, the probability's gone down by 2 to the power of 3, which is 87.5%, right? It's an exponential curve with physical proximity to the CEO. We solve that problem, that you get more diverse ideas because you're not just getting it from people who are sitting in a boardroom or in a corporate office, but rather from the frontline workers, the customers, the suppliers, et cetera. And number 3, we enable or we enable people to, or sorry, the members of an organization or ecosystem to feel more as owners of the system rather than as employees. And one of the core things that you want, and this goes back to the cultural aspect of innovation, is people are only going to innovate if they feel like they are part owners in an emotional sense of the organization. If they don't feel like their voice is heard, if they don't feel like anybody cares, if they don't feel like they will benefit and they're part of they're an organ of an organization that benefits, they won't participate and care. And we generally make people feel included. Like a fun example from us was one of our CSMs using IdeaScale submitted an idea that was bothering one of her customers about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And 2 weeks later, it was pushed out the door. And she was so excited that she got to see her idea, be selected, and then be pushed out the door as a product feature in our software. And she got to see that happen, and she got to see the results. And that's real, it was wonderful to see her say that on Slack.
All right. And so I guess the transparency is very reinforcing.
Yeah. Now transparency cuts both ways, right? If you take everyone's ideas and you shove them, you light them on fire and call them stupid, it's worse, right? But you have to create that again. That's what I'm saying. Software scales up and does more efficiently what you're doing, but software used for bad purposes also can scale up bad outcomes.
Yeah. So we're coming toward the end of the show. Is there any specific call to action that you'd have for people around innovation or any of the things we talked about?
Sure. I'd say kind of two calls of action. Number one is innovation and creativity more broadly is not some random thing that happens. It's actually well studied. There's processes. Go read on Wikipedia or go read our blog or whatever source you prefer. There's actually right ways to do innovation to be creative as an organization. That's number one. Number two is our software is completely free for organizations and teams up to 100 people. So you can be an individual entrepreneur or a team of 100 people at a $1 trillion corporation. Our software is completely free, and I encourage people to use it. So that's the second call to action I'd recommend.
Yeah, that's I didn't know that. That's incredible. And do you find a lot of people take advantage of that?
Yeah, so I have something between like 40 or 50 signups of legitimate people every single week. Of those, about 20% of them are folks who are at large organizations. And look, it's great if they eventually become customers, but even if they don't and they just stick at the 99 limit, our mission as an organization is to support innovation. And it costs me nothing to enable 99 people to go use this software for free. So I'm glad to do that. That's part of our ethos and the mission statements written out by our founders.
Oh, that's incredible. That's great. Well, I hope hope your conversion there is high because especially in these times, everyone can benefit from thinking very differently. Well, Nick, thanks for being on the show. We appreciate it. And to our audience, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you like the content, please share and subscribe the episode with others. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John.